Speed is my motto, nothing's ever holding back.
Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of the Lone Road iRacing podcast. As always, I'm your host Guy Robertson, and wherever you are in the big wide world, whether you're driving to work, walking your dog, sitting in the garage staring at your sim rig, waiting for the family maybe to go to bed, or perhaps you've just finished another race that didn't quite go to plan. Thank you for spending part of your week with me. Now, before we get started, if you're new to the podcast, then a huge welcome. Every week we take one topic from the world of iRacing and try to dig a little deeper than simply reporting the headlines. We look at the psychology, the racecraft, the community, and hopefully help every one of us become a slightly better sim racer by the end of each episode. And this week, well, it's fair to say the internet has had plenty to say. If you've been anywhere near Reddit, Facebook, Discord, or the iRacing forums over the last few days, you'll already know exactly what I'm talking about. For the first time in a very long while, iRacing has announced an increase in subscription prices. Well, this was like the world stopped spinning. Almost immediately the community split into two very familiar camps. One side saying it's only a few pounds a month, stop complaining. The other saying I've already bought all the cars, all the tracks, and now they want even more money. Sound familiar? As always, the truth probably lies somewhere between the two. So today, I don't want this to become another episode where we all shout at each other. I don't want to tell you that you're wrong if you're unhappy. Nor do I want to tell you that iRacing can do no wrong. Instead, I'd like us to have a conversation, because I think there's actually a much bigger question hiding underneath this old debate. Not has iRacing become more expensive, because that's pretty obvious. The real question is, does iRacing still represent good value? Those things aren't the same. Something can be expensive and still be excellent value. Likewise, something can be cheap and leave you feeling disappointed. So today we're going to put emotion to one side for a little while and simply explore the facts. We'll look at what has actually changed. We'll compare iRacing with other racing simulators. We'll compare it with other subscription-based games. And we'll compare it with other hobbies. We'll ask whether this affects newcomers more than long-term members. And finally, I'll give you my own thoughts. Not because I expect everyone to agree, but because that's what this podcast has always been about. Sharing ideas and starting conversations. Helping us all think about sim racing from a slightly different perspective. Later in today's episode, we'll also have another brilliant iRacing Agony Uncle email from Steve. He's moving into higher splits racing GT4s and has noticed something many drivers experience for the very first time. The tyres seem to disappear towards the end of every race. Is it tyre wear? Don't know. Is it setup? Could be. Or is it something else? It's a fantastic question and one I think a lot of us will recognise. So grab yourself a coffee, settle into your favourite chair, and let's get into today's episode. So what really happened this week? Before we all form opinions, let's make sure we're all talking about the same thing. Because social media has an amazing ability to take one announcement, mix it in half a dozen rumours, add a splash of outrage, and suddenly nobody really knows what's fact anymore. So here's what we know. iRacing has announced an increase in subscription prices. Importantly, this isn't an increase to the cost of buying cars, it isn't an increase to tracks, it isn't suddenly introducing new hidden fees, it's specifically the subscription itself that's changing. Currently, members have also been given an opportunity to renew before the new prices come into effect, effectively allowing people to lock in the current pricing if they wish. Now, whenever any company announces a price rise, there's one immediate reaction. Nobody likes paying more, right? And that's completely understandable. Whether it's electricity, fuel, broadband, Netflix, or iRacing, nobody wakes up hoping something becomes more expensive. So if your immediate reaction was frustration, you're probably in very good company. But let's pause for a moment, because something interesting happens online. We often judge a headline before we judge the context, and context matters a lot. One of the first questions I asked myself wasn't how much more, it was when was the last increase? Because they're two very different questions. If prices were increasing every year, I'd probably feel very differently. If they doubled overnight, again, that's a different conversation entirely. Instead, we're talking about the first increase in a very long time. Now, that doesn't automatically make it acceptable, but it does change the conversation. Imagine your favourite local cafe. If they haven't increased the price of coffee for years despite inflation, rising wages, higher electricity bills, and increasing rent, eventually something has to give. Again, that doesn't mean you'll enjoy paying more, but it might explain why they're asking. And I think that's where this discussion becomes much more interesting. Not can they increase prices? Of course they can. The better question is, what are we actually paying for? Because unlike many games, iRacing doesn't stand still. Every season brings updates, physics changes, tyre developments, new cars, new laser scan circuits, weather improvements, AI improvements, user interface refinements, ongoing server maintenance, official series, stewarding, matchmaking, and of course the development of features that haven't yet arrived. Things like career mode and the new graphic engine. Whether those things justify the increase is something we'll come back to later. But before we can answer that, we need to understand exactly what makes iRacing different from almost every other racing simulator on the market. Because that's where this conversation starts to get really interesting. So we'll be back in a second for the next part of today's podcast. iRacing is different, but is it better value? So before we decide whether iRacing has become too expensive, let's compare it with the rest of the market. Because one thing I've noticed over the last few days is people saying, well, Assetto Corsa doesn't charge a subscription, or ACC is a one-off purchase, or RaceRoom is free. And they're absolutely right. But here's the thing, they are also completely different products. Now, before anybody starts shouting at their podcast app, I'm not saying they're better and I'm not saying they're worse. I'm simply saying they're built on completely different business models. Let's take a quick tour through the world of sim racing. Assetto Corsa, probably one of the greatest racing simulators ever made. Released back in 2014, still hugely popular today. Buy the game, maybe buy a few DLC packs, and basically that's it. There's no monthly subscription, there's no annual renewal. And thanks to an incredible modding community, you can race almost anything on almost any circuit imaginable. It's fantastic value, especially when Steam has one of its regular sales and you can pick up the complete edition for the price of a takeaway pizza. But here's the difference. Assetto Corsa isn't funding official races every hour. It isn't running thousands of online events every single day. It isn't maintaining a worldwide ranking system. It isn't reviewing protests. It isn't employing laser scanning teams for every few weeks. It's a brilliant simulator, don't get me wrong, but it's solving a different problem. Moving on to its sister version, Assetto Corsa Competizione. Again, it's a one-time purchase. Additional DLC if you want it. If GT3 and GT2 racing is your thing, it's an absolutely brilliant simulator. Force feedback is excellent, the sound is superb. The racing can be fantastic. But organised competition only relies on third-party leagues like LFM or private communities. Again, a completely different business model. Let's move to Automobilista 2. One purchase, optional season pass, beautiful weather, fantastic variety of cars. And it's slowly growing all the time. Again, there's no subscription. RaceRoom does something completely different. You can download it for free, then buy individual content as and when you need it. Almost like building your own simulator. Again, completely different. Le Mans Ultimate, a newer simulator but huge potential. Purchase the game, purchase additional content if you wish, and it's got no annual subscription. So, at first glance, people are absolutely right. Most racing simulators don't ask for an annual subscription. But let's ask another question. What exactly does your iRacing subscription buy? Because I don't think it buys what many people think it buys. So you're not paying to drive the car, and that sounds strange straight away, but hear me out. When you buy a Porsche 718 GT4, you own access to that car. When you buy Spa, you own access to that circuit. The subscription isn't really paying for the Porsche or the track. It's paying for everything happening around them. Imagine if iRacing switched the servers off tomorrow. No official races, no safety rating, no iRating, no championships, no endurance special events, no hosted sessions, no protests, no matchmaking. You'd still technically own your content, but the experience would be completely different. What you're subscribing to is the service, and the word service is incredibly important. iRacing isn't really trying to sell us a game. Now think about it. You don't buy Netflix because they made one good film. You subscribe because next month there'll be something new. You don't subscribe to Spotify because you only ever listen to one song. You subscribe because the library keeps growing. The same applies to iRacing. Every 12 weeks, another season, other updates, other build, and probably, like normal, a collection of improvements. Some large and some very small. Some you love and some you don't even notice. But development really never stops. That's very different to buying a traditional game once every 5 years. Now let's step outside of sim racing for a moment because subscriptions aren't unique anymore. In fact, they're almost everywhere. How many of us pay for Netflix? Spotify, Amazon Prime, Disney Plus, Xbox Game Pass, PlayStation Plus, cloud storage, music streaming, video editing software, the list goes on. Most of us probably have subscriptions leaving our bank account every month, probably more than we even realise. Now, that doesn't suddenly mean another subscription is welcome. Far from it. Subscription fatigue is real. There comes a point where you start asking, do I actually use this enough? And I think that's exactly the right question. Not, does it cost money? Everything, of course, costs money. The better question is, am I getting enough value back? Let's talk about time. Here's something I found myself thinking about this week. Imagine two people, both pay exactly the same annual iRacing subscription. Driver 1 races, let's say twice a month, maybe 20 races across an entire year. Driver 2 races 5 evenings every week, runs special events, league races, endurance races, practices, test setups, chats with friends on Discord, and creates liveries. Sounds like me. Maybe even listens to podcasts while they're doing it. They're paying exactly the same amount, but are they getting the same value? Probably not. One person's cost per hour could be several pounds. The other person's could be just a few pence. And suddenly the conversation changes. Now we're going to compare it now with real motorsport. And this one always makes me smile, because as sim racers we sometimes forget just how expensive our real world hobby actually is. Let's say you fancy an evening of indoor karting with your mates, 30, 40, maybe £50, done in half an hour. Fancy a track day. By the time you've paid the entry fee, fuel, tyres, brake pads, insurance, food and travel, you could easily be looking at several £100 before you've even unloaded the car. What about golf? Green fees, memberships, equipment, football, you have to buy season tickets, travel, food and programs. Basically, every hobby has a cost. The question isn't whether a hobby is expensive, the question is, does it give you enough back? So here's my story. When I joined iRacing back in August 2020, I nearly didn't. I'll be honest, I looked at the subscription, then I looked at the cost of the tracks, and then the cars, and I remember thinking, blimey, this isn't cheap. Maybe some of you had exactly the same reaction. But here I am, nearly 5 years later. I've raced hundreds upon hundreds of races, met people from all over the world, won races I'll never forget, and lost races I'll never forget too. Sometimes for all the wrong reasons. I've learnt racecraft, patience, consistency. Even this podcast exists because of iRacing. Without joining back in 2020, none of this happens. Now, that doesn't mean it's good value for everyone. If you only race once every couple of months, for example, maybe it isn't good value for that individual. If life has become too busy, again, maybe it isn't. If you're no longer enjoying it, maybe it's time to take a break. And you know what? That's perfectly okay. Because the value of the hobby isn't measured by what everyone else thinks. It's measured by what it gives you as an individual. Now, I think that's where this whole debate really lands. This isn't actually about price, it's about value. And value is something every single one of us measures differently. Right, we're going to have a quick break and then we're going to look at both sides of this debate, because there are some very good arguments from people who think the increase is perfectly reasonable, and there are equally good arguments for those who believe iRacing is slowly becoming too expensive especially for newcomers. And we're going to hear both sides, because that's where the conversation gets really interesting. We'll be right back. We're having a quick pause here to mention our sponsor, Outlap, who are supporting the podcast. Outlap is built around the side of sim racing we don't talk about enough. The focus, the preparation, and mental work that happens long before the race actually starts. It's not about hype or loud designs, it's about process, patience, and showing up ready, whether that's in the rig or stepping away from it. If that side of sim racing resonates with you, you'll find Outlap quietly ticking along in the background. I want to thank Outlap again for sponsoring the podcast, and the link to their sim racing apparel store is in the show notes. One of the things I love most about our community is that people care. Seriously, think about it. If nobody cared about iRacing, nobody would be talking about the price increase at all. People would simply shrug their shoulders and move on. But that's not what's happened. People are passionate because they have invested time, money, and emotion into our hobby. So let's do something that's becoming increasingly rare these days. Let's listen to both sides. Not to decide who's right, but to understand why people feel the way they do. Now, this first one is the case for the price rise. Let's start with those defending iRacing. Their argument is actually quite straightforward. They'll tell you that almost everything in life has become more expensive over the last few years. Electricity, fuel, rent, staff wages, computer hardware, cloud services, software development, none of those things are getting cheaper. So why should iRacing somehow be immune? After all, this isn't a company that's standing still. Think about everything that's happened since many of us first joined. Rain, the Tempest weather system, dynamic track evolution, new tyre models, dozens of laser scan circuits, new manufacturers, new cars, AI racing, improved UI, endurance special events, better anti-cheat measures, constant physics updates, and now career mode is on the horizon, along with an entirely new graphics engine. And none of that appears by magic. It takes programmers, artists, engineers, QA testers, server infrastructure, customer support, licensing agreements, laser scanning teams traveling around the world. It's easy to forget just how many people are involved in creating what we experience every evening when we click register. Supporters of the increase would argue that continued investment requires continued income. If you want this service to improve, someone has to pay for that improvement. Now let's move on to the other side of the courtroom, the case against the price rise. So we've flipped the coin here, because the people unhappy about the increase have also some very valid points. The biggest one, the subscription isn't the only thing we're paying for. Let's imagine somebody's completely new to iRacing. They buy their membership, great. Then they discover that to race the series they really want to, they need another track, and another, and another. Maybe a GT4 car, then a GT3, and perhaps a LMP2. Before long, they've spent hundreds of pounds. Suddenly, the annual subscription starts feeling a little bit just like another bill added on top. And that's before we've even talked about a sim rig. A wheel, pedals, PC monitor, VR headset maybe, triple screens maybe, a seat, a button box. Hobby can become expensive surprisingly quickly. Now, we all know that nobody forces us to buy these things, but perception matters. If you're already financially stretched, even a relatively modest increase can feel significant, especially if you're trying to persuade your partner that another racing purchase is absolutely essential. I think most of us have had that conversation at least once. The new driver's dilemma. This is where I think the discussion becomes really interesting, because I'm not actually worried about the long-term members. Most of us have built our collections over years. We've spread the costs, brought tracks one season at a time, picked up participation credits, waited for Black Friday renewals, and we've grown into our hobby. Imagine that instead you're joining today. You look at YouTube, everyone says GT3 is amazing. Then you realise to race GT3 properly, you're probably going to need several cars, several tracks, a subscription. Suddenly, the barrier to entry feels much higher than it did a few years ago. That's a genuine challenge for iRacing, not because existing members will necessarily leave, but because attracting brand new members becomes harder, and every healthy community needs new drivers. And are we comparing apples with apples? Here's something else I've been thinking about this week. People often compare iRacing to Assetto Corsa or ACC or Automobilista 2, and those are those really fair comparisons? If I buy Assetto Corsa, I'm buying a simulator. If I subscribe to iRacing, I'm joining an organised motorsport service. Those aren't exactly the same thing. It's a little like comparing buying a football in a sports shop while paying to join an organised Saturday football league. Both involve football, but they're very different experiences. One gives you the equipment, the other provides the competition, the officials, the fixtures, the league table, the organisation, and that's why comparing price alone doesn't tell anybody the full story. So here's where I sit. Probably exactly where you'd expect, somewhere in the middle. Do I like paying more? Clearly not. Does anybody? Clearly not. Would I have preferred the subscription to stay exactly as it is forever? Of course, anybody would. But I also understand that businesses can't freeze prices indefinitely while continuing to invest. Equally, I completely understand those who feel iRacing is becoming harder to justify financially, especially if they're only racing once a week, or they're just starting their sim racing journey. Those opinions aren't unreasonable, they're honest, and I think it's important that we acknowledge both perspectives, because the minute we discuss one side, only the conversation stops. Okay, I'd like to leave you with a question. Not one for Reddit or Facebook, one for yourself. If iRacing disappeared tomorrow, would you miss it? For me, I definitely would, without hesitation. I'd miss the competition, the friendships, the special events, the nerves sitting on the grid, the satisfaction of surviving a chaotic opening lap, the excitement of seeing my iRating creep upwards, the challenge of learning a new circuit, this podcast. In fact, the podcast wouldn't even exist without iRacing. I made friends across continents because of this hobby. I've laughed, celebrated, been frustrated, learned patience, and learned humility. I've learned that sometimes finishing sixth is a better drive than actually winning, and that's difficult to put a price on. Now, your answer might be different, and that's perfectly fine, because the value of any hobby is deeply personal. Not one on the internet can decide that for you. Only you know what it gives you back. One thought before we head to the iRacing Agony Uncle. This week's debate has reminded me of something we talk about quite often on this podcast. Don't make emotional decisions in emotional moments. Whether that's diving into a gap on lap 1, responding to an angry voice chat, buying another GT3 car you'll never drive, or deciding whether to renew your subscription. Take a breath, look at the facts, look at your finances, look at how much you really use the service. Then make the decision that's right for you. Not the loudest voice on social media, the one that's right for your circumstances. Because guess what? That can be part of racecraft too. And it's good lifecraft too. We're going to take a very short break then, and we'll be back with this week's Agony Uncle. Every week I ask you to send me your questions, not because I have all the answers, far from it, but because chances are if you're struggling with something, hundreds of other listeners probably are too. And today's email is a brilliant example of that. It comes from a listener or a viewer called Steve. He writes, "Hi Guy, loving the weekly podcast and always look forward to it at the end of the week for the latest episode. I've only been on iRacing since December 2025, so I'm now in my 3rd season. I've got a decent aluminium profile rig with a Moser R5, upgraded load cell brake, and I've spent 5 or 6 evenings a week racing for a couple of hours. This season I'm focusing entirely on GT4 in the Porsche 718. I race in the 20-minute fixed races, the 30-minute open races and the 120-minute endurance races. The endurance races I change tyres during my first fuel stops and I can immediately feel that extra grip afterwards. In the 20 and 30-minute races there are no pit stops. Towards the end of these races I can feel the car gradually losing grip. Drivers that I've held behind me for most of the race suddenly begin catching me and sometimes pass me. Is it all in my head? Am I overdriving early in the race and ruining my tyres? Any advice on tyre management? Thanks always, Steve." Steve, firstly, thank you for another fantastic email. And secondly, congratulations. You've reached the stage where you're noticing tyre management. Believe it or not, that's actually progress. Because, well, when most of us first start sim racing, we don't notice tyre wear at all. We're simply trying to stay on the circuit. We're learning braking points, finding apexes, remembering which way the next corner goes. Tyres, they're the last thing we're thinking about. But as you improve and as your consistency improves, as you move into higher splits, little things become big things. Half a tenth matters, tiny slides matter, and tyre temperatures matter. So the very fact you're asking this question tells me you're becoming a more complete racing driver. Now let's answer the question. Is it really the tyres? The short answer, yes, probably, but perhaps not in the way you think. Most people imagine tyre wear as something dramatic. almost like a switch. Lap 15, everything's fine. Lap 16, suddenly there's no grip. Realistically, that's really what happens. Tyres are constantly changing from the moment you leave the grid. They're heating, cooling, flexing, scrubbing every corner, every braking zone and every acceleration. You're making tiny withdrawals from what I call your grip account. Imagine your tyres are like a bank account. Every smooth corner you spend £1. Every tiny slide you spend £5, and every lock-up you spend 10. Every moment of a wheel spin is another withdrawal. The problem is most drivers don't realise how many little withdrawals they're making. Then 20 minutes later they're wondering why their account is empty. The biggest tyre killer isn't what most people think. People often blame aggressive throttle or heavy braking or setup. They're all certainly factors, but the biggest tyre killer? Sliding. Tiny, almost invisible slides. Not massive drifts, not YouTube highlights. Just little moments where the tyre's been asked to do slightly more than it really wants to. The rear steps out a fraction, you catch it, you think nice save. The tyre is thinking, I'll remember that. Multiply that by 50 corners. Now you're starting to understand why someone else's car feels alive while yours starts to feel like it's skating on ice. GT4 rewards patience. The Porsche 718 GT4 is actually a wonderful teacher of this. It's a car that rewards smoothness. If you attack every braking zone, throw the car into the apex, stamp on the throttle, it will definitely let you know. Not immediately, it'll wait. Then 10 or 15 minutes later, it starts asking for the bill. The drivers passing you near the end of the race may not actually be faster, they may simply have been kinder to their tyres during the first half of the race. And that's racecraft. It's delayed gratification. You're sacrificing a tiny amount now to gain a bigger advantage later. Are you driving qualifying laps? This is another trap. Steve, ask yourself this: when the lights go green, are you trying to drive your absolute fastest lap every single lap? Because if you are, there's a good chance you're asking too much of the tyres. One of the biggest lessons I ever learned was this: the fastest race is really made up of your fastest laps. Read that again. Championship winning drivers aren't usually producing qualifying laps every lap. They're producing incredibly consistent laps, and that's a huge difference. Sometimes driving at 98% instead of 100% means your final laps are actually quicker than anybody else's. So here's a challenge for you. Next time you're practicing, run 2 20-lap sessions. In session 1, drive exactly how you normally would. Attack every braking zone, every apex and every exit. Then take a short break, maybe 30 minutes, and reset. Now run another 20 laps, but this time brake 2 meters earlier. Turn the wheel slightly less. Feed the throttle in a little more gently. Forget about setting one brilliant lap. Concentrate on producing 20 beautiful, smooth laps. Then compare the averages. Not your fastest lap, but the average. I honestly wouldn't be surprised if the smoother session ends up being quicker overall. Another question, could it be setup or driver? Now Steve, you also race the Open Series, so yes, setup absolutely plays a role. Tyre pressures, camber toe, brake bias, suspension, differential settings, all of these influence temperatures and wear. But you also mentioned seeing exactly the same thing in the fixed series. So this tells me something. The setup isn't changing, the driver is, and strangely that's pretty good news. because it means this is something you can improve completely free of charge. You don't need new pedals, don't need a new direct drive upgrade, and no expensive setup subscription, just better habits. Final thought, Steve, don't think of tyre management as driving slowly. Think that's one of the biggest misconceptions in sim racing. Tyre management is about being gentle, it's about being efficient. Every steering input should have a purpose. Every brake application should be progressive. Every throttle squeeze should be deliberate. You're not trying to save the tyres, you're trying to stop wasting them, and that's a huge difference. Now I'd like to leave you with this thought. Imagine your tyres are giving you 100% grip at the start of the race. Every unnecessary correction, tiny slide, every lock-up, every moment of wheel spin, you're making a withdrawal from that grip account. The drivers are overtaking you with 3 laps to go, probably haven't suddenly found extra pace. They've simply spending grip that they've banked 20 minutes earlier. And if you listen to this podcast for any length of time, you will know exactly what I'm going to say. Bank the result. This week I'm going to add something new, bank the grip. Because sometimes the race isn't won in the final lap, it's won by the tiny decisions you made in the opening 5. Steve, an absolutely fantastic question. I generally think you reached one of the most exciting stages of sim racing. You've never stopped asking, how do I get faster? And you've started asking, how do I go faster for longer? And that's really good racing, where really good racing drivers are made. So thank you very much for the email. I hope to hear you get on over the coming weeks. Okay, closing summary of today's podcast. Well, that's about all we've got time for this week. It's been an interesting episode, hopefully for everybody. On the face of it, we started by talking about a subscription price increase, but I think we've actually ended up talking about something much bigger. The value of iRacing and what it brings to us as individuals. Every one of us values this hobby differently. For some people, iRacing is an occasional escape after a long week at work. For others, it's a competitive sport. For some, it's where we've made lifelong friends. For others, it's the closest they'll ever become to standing on a grid at Le Mans, Daytona or Spa. Only you as an individual can decide whether it's worth the money. Don't let Reddit decide, Facebook, and don't let me decide. Look at how much you race yourself. Look at how much enjoyment you personally get from it. Look at your own circumstances. Then make the decision that's right for you. And that brings me nicely to Steve's question, because in many ways Steve's email perfectly summed up what we've been talking about throughout this whole episode. Whether it's your wallet or your tyres, the goal is exactly the same. Manage your resources wisely. The fastest lap isn't always the smartest lap. The biggest purchase isn't always the best investment. Sometimes the greatest gains come from patience, consistency, and making hundreds of small, good decisions instead of chasing one spectacular moment. And that's true in iRacing. And if we're honest, it's probably true in life as well. So here's my challenge for all of the listeners and viewers this week. Next time you climb into the sim, don't just ask yourself, how can I be faster? Ask yourself, how can I be smarter? Can you brake a little smoother? Can you save your tyres for those final 5 laps? Can you avoid that risky move on lap 1? And can you finish one place higher simply by making one less mistake? Because the best racers don't just drive quickly, they think clearly. And as we've said so many times on this podcast, bank the result. This week, maybe add another one. bank the grip, because the drivers attacking in the finish are often the ones who protected their tyres at the start. As always, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this week's topic. Do you think iRacing still represents good value? Has a subscription increase changed your plans? Or do you think it's simply the cost of a constantly evolving service? Let me know over on the podcast socials or drop me an email. I genuinely read every message, and many of your questions end up becoming future episodes or Agony Uncle features, just like Steve's did today. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd really appreciate if you could leave a rating or review on your favourite podcast platform. It helps more iRacers discover the show, and it means we can keep growing this fantastic community together. Until next week, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and whether you're racing, race smart, stay patient, and as always, bank the result. Bye for now, and I'll see you in next week's episode. Or on the track, and don't forget to say hello.
Whatever it takes, we're racing, we're in the zone. Whatever it takes, we push hard, never alone. I'm in the cockpit, the engines roar, hear me now. We're racing circles, got a hustle, made a vow. Chasing victory, it's all or nothing on the track. Speed is my motto, nothing's ever holding back. Whatever it takes, we're